to another episode of Subscription Ecommerce Live. Thanks for joining us today. We have someone very exciting in our midst. We have Joelle Goldman from Churn Buster, who is going to be teaching us about why you need a subscription retention strategy and how to implement one that actually achieves results. Welcome to the show, Joelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so before we launch into questions, which I want to encourage people to ask in the chat, and do not feel afraid to interrupt the conversation. We like this to feel like the meeting everyone wants to attend, as opposed to the one you hate going to within your company or wherever you go to meetings. I don't know what that is, but we all know the difference between a good and a bad meeting. And one that I define as good is one that stimulates conversations, ideas, prompts you to go out and make a change in what you're doing and test and experiment and try some things. So that's what we always hope to do. And this is brought to you by ARPU. We provide upcoming shipment notifications that increase AOV and LTV while reducing churn with 2-click upsells and delays. This also now includes custom messages based on subscription products. So like what someone has in their existing subscription, you can base the upsells you're going to show them based on what item they already have in there, or renewal counts. So if it's their first renewal or their 6th renewal and you want to give them some extra deep discount or a special gift or freebie, that's available. Or you can base a campaign off of both those two triggers. So you can go and find out more at getarpu.com. We serve recharge customers who are on Shopify and BigCommerce. That is the end of the promotional material. Welcome to the show, Joelle. We're going to be talking about retention. So my first question is just for you to kind of explain to me how you learned about retention, like what kind of experiences through Churn Buster that you've had that kind of lead you to the point where you can speak with authority about it because you have watched the data take shape, right? Like, because I know that JD Graffam mentioned he saw you present at ChargeX, and he was like, she had this great slide, and it was like the most photographed slide of the whole event because she was talking about like merchant A versus merchant B and the things they did to prevent or address churn and the things that they did to prevent or address churn and the difference over time. And so that kind of inspired us to say like, hey, let's have you come on and teach us what you've learned. Like, obviously you can't teach us everything in the scope of 45 minutes, but what things were you seeing that kind of fueled your ability to speak to retention for like specifically recharge merchants, because that's who we talk to mostly, but in general, what have you learned through this experience with Churn Buster?
So to go way back,
let's do it.
Matt and
I'm ready.
We started a company called HookFeed like back in 2012 that was essentially just customer analytics for subscription companies, mostly SaaS companies at the time. And we noticed that the most common use case was that people were using it to track failed payments, but there wasn't anything you could do about it. But that was like the one common thread that we saw across companies, is they were just watching for those events happening. And then it was on them to figure out what to do about it. So that was sort of a light bulb moment for us that, hey, there's a need here. So we took over Churn Buster in 2015. It's been around since 2013 or maybe even 2012. Mm-hmm. So we've been working on this for 8+ years, almost 10 years for the company, how long the company's been around.
Don't you start to feel old when you can say you've like done something for a decade? Like I do. Like when I start thinking back in chunks, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm saying it's like it was yesterday, but it has been 10 years.
Yeah, we won't go there.
Okay.
No, but so we've been, working at this for a long time. We started working with Recharge in 2018 when e-commerce, and specifically subscription e-commerce, started really exploding. Our other co-founder, Ken, was actually one of the first subscription e-commerce pioneers. He had a company called Manpacks, and they were doing, underwear and socks and t-shirts and all the basics, really way before anyone else. So he
Fun.
brought that, e-commerce background and all the struggles that you deal with physical goods. And Matt and I brought a lot of the software background, and we've just been working with e-commerce ever since. And as our customer base has grown, we've started to see data within each vertical and what works for different people, and really start to create, really customized solutions that actually address the needs that people have.
Okay, so for anyone who is listening and isn't familiar with Churn Buster and what it does, can you explain the solution? Because I think that lends some credibility. We don't get very promotional in this series because we're like content and solution based, but I think it's important that you understand what Churn Buster works to do for merchants so that you can understand what's driving the responses and the conversation that we're about to have about retention.
Yeah. So when people think about churn, they're usually thinking about it in two ways: passive churn and active churn. And passive churn is active churn, obviously, is people choosing to cancel. Passive churn is what we think about when a recurring payment fails and the customer never updates their card and they go away. So that's the piece, the credit card renewal piece is what we work with here at Churn Buster. So we're essentially a layer that sits on top of a subscription management platform and handles that recovery process when a customer fails a payment.
And so there's a term. I worked in subscription SaaS for a couple of years before I even knew this term. I knew what failed payments were, but I had never heard the term dunning.
Right.
And so am I correct in saying that like the definition of dunning is when a payment fails on a card, or is there something more precise?
It kind of refers to the process of trying to recover that missed payment. So that
okay, so dunning is the attempted recovery process.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. See, I just learned something new too, because I think it's
not a common term. Like people really in the industry who are dealing with this on a daily basis would know that term, but the average person who's seeing this happen and they're trying to find a solution and they're Googling about it, they may not even know to look up the word dunning.
No, it's one of those terms where I think the first few times I heard it, I just nodded along like, yeah, I know exactly what they're talking about. I have no clue.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think it's something to do with failed payments, right? Like that's how you respond. So what I love to do in this show is make sure that we're taking it back enough layers to where someone is like, oh my God, you just threw 50 acronyms at me that make no sense. So you mentioned passive and active churn. I want to kind of launch right into the topics that we suggested that we were going to hit on during this session and start to think about, what the lowest churn companies are doing to extend those subscriber lifetimes and LTVs, and any trends that you have personally or Churn Buster as a company has seen happening.
Yeah. So the biggest trend we're seeing in the industry right now is that people are really paying attention to retention.
Yay.
It's been something that we've been, beating the drum on for years now, but acquisition was so cheap and so easy for a long time. It didn't matter if you were acquiring a bunch of people and churning some percentage out because it didn't hurt that much. It's a lot more expensive now, and it hurts a lot more to lose these hard-won subscribers. So people are really starting to pay attention across the board, every vertical. So that's kind of the global trend we're seeing. And in terms of what the lowest churn companies are doing, I wish there was a simple answer to that question. What I can say is that the companies that we see with the highest recovery rates, meaning they recover the most amount of their customers who failed a payment, they have the lowest overall churn rates. So essentially what that means is you can't ignore your passive churn. You have to really do everything from the ground up to build a subscription program that people want. You have to provide value. They have to want your product. There's things like ARPU that you can use along the way, especially for like replenishment items, where before they may just cancel if they have too much of something. Now they can reschedule, skip a shipment, whatever, to keep them around longer without having to hit cancel. We can get more into some of these tactics maybe as we go, but essentially you kind of have to attack retention from the ground up, like everything, and failed payments are a piece of that. And the lowest churn companies are the lowest churn companies because they have good fundamentals.
Okay, so my interpretation of that is the lowest churn companies are the companies who care about retention and who care about churn and are addressing it from multiple angles, right? Like,
Right.
It's going to make more sense if you're not ignoring a segment of churn.
So can I screen share something?
Of course. Seth, if she doesn't have the ability, do the God thing and give her screen sharing. We think of it as a privilege within the Simple Focus software team. Screen sharing is a privilege, not a right.
I will earn it.
You should, there you go.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a slide from ChargeX. You mentioned the This is the slide that I think people were taking pictures of. The biggest myth about tackling churn is that passive churn and active churn are two separate things that you can approach separately. Active churn is when a customer really wants to cancel a subscription. They just don't want it anymore. And there's ways you can deal with that. Passive churn, true passive churn is really an edge case. It's if someone fails a payment and they never hear from you and they just disappear. That doesn't happen that often. Usually what happens is they fail a payment and they get an email from you or an SMS or some notification, and they choose to either update their card, to cancel their subscription, or just to ignore you, which is really active churn. If you think about it, they're making a choice. So they're really not so mutually exclusive. And you can see this with this case study that we did. These two companies on the right, company A, company B, these are real companies, by the way, both really high volume in the same vertical. And they were running the exact same process through Churn Buster to recover failed payments. One recovered 17%, one recovered 80%. One had almost a third of people canceling as soon as they got a notification to update their credit card, whereas another had only like 1% canceling. Same volume, same niche vertical, exact same recovery process. So why is this happening? It's that active churn component. It's the fundamentals of getting good fit customers, good fit subscribers in from the beginning. So company A was running very aggressive promotions, offering free product, putting people in a subscription when it wasn't super clear that they actually were going to be a subscriber, which is just a bad practice. And unfortunately, I see it happen a fair amount. So a lot of people were signing up to get the free product, to get the big discount. They didn't even realize they were getting put in a subscription. And come renewal time, you can see what happens. Whereas company B puts a ton of focus on bringing in really good fit people. They have a mission. They have, a community really that they've built around their product, and people love it. They stick around. You can see that 80% renew their cards when that time comes. So it really is something that has to be addressed from the ground up.
Right. So what you're saying is, just because you have something automated set up to say like, hey, your card failed, can you update that? Right? Like that's not a retention strategy. That's more of like a tactic you use. To
a degree. So, people come to us, they want us to wave a magic wand and just make all this go away. Even on day one, we have a lot of people asking about retrying a card on a certain time of day, a certain day of the week, running split tests and A/B tests like from day one. And I mean, those are the kinds of things at volume you can get that extra 1%, 3%, 5%, squeak out those optimizations. Those are not going to be the difference makers. The difference makers is having a process in place that is airtight. It follows best practices. You're not going to be losing people unnecessarily. It's going to be an extension of your brand experience. Treat people with respect. And if you have good fit people, make it really easy for them to make that update and come back through. If you are bringing in really bad fit people with, tactics, like I mentioned, extreme discounts, things like that, there's really nothing that can happen further down the funnel to fix that.
So here's an interesting question. When you looked at this data, was company A seeing a lot of early churn, like first renewal, second renewal kind of situation, or because this was looking at failed payments?
So we're only tracking the failed payments here.
Okay.
If people were just canceling their subscription in their recharge portal, that's not data.
Okay, so this is separate from that issue, because we see a lot of that issue going on too, which is
there's a correlation directly. If they have really high churn, pre-payment failure, they're going to have really high churn post-payment failure.
So much sense. It makes so much sense. And we've had so many people come on, and inevitably we get to the, hey, should you default to subscriptions? And if you want to stop the screen share, that's fine, because I kind of want to get your take on this. And we've had some interesting answers. Overwhelmingly, most of the people we have spoken with say, oh no, that's sleazy. Like, and use kind of like terminology around it. Feels like someone's getting tricked into the subscription. And then if you counter argue that, then they're like, no, like people can accidentally click this a few times and subscribe and not realize they're subscribed. Better to err on the side of them not feeling like they got duped into a subscription, right? We had one person come on and talk about, well, if you set it up super, super clearly, like if you set the expectation that if you subscribe now, you're going to get a message letting you know when you're about to be charged again, and you will be able to cancel it, etc. Like if you set very clear expectations, his argument was that it was better to get them into a subscription and have the ability to have them be a second, third, fourth time customer than to lose the opportunity to do that, because you could continue to win them, right? So I'm curious what your stance on that is, because I don't know if I have like a one size fits all solution that I think every subscription brand should follow, but I do know that I'm starting to see nuances where some people do it really well and some people just like make it feel hacky accidentally, it almost seems.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's no one size fits all. Of course, you never want to trick someone into a subscription. That's unethical, and it's going to backfire on you anyway. But if not a failed payment, a chargeback and an angry email and customer support costs, and you add that up at scale, and that's certainly not what you wanted in the first place. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to opt into if you're going to have it default to subscription, it has to be super clear. And I think there's an element too that it depends on what you're selling, and it depends on how people are coming to you. If you're doing like mass advertising and casting like a really wide net, defaulting to subscriptions probably not going to work very well for you, because people aren't bought into your values or your community or really what you're doing. They might be curious. The ad might have been intriguing. Hey, I would try this. The price is right. I'll give that a try. That's not the time to default into subscription. But if you're acquiring people via something really niche, you're building up a community of relationships and funneling people that already have some buy-in to what you're doing, and then you make it really clear that they're going into a subscription, that might be worth an experiment, as long as no one's getting tricked along the way.
Yeah. I think that's like maybe the number one piece of advice that Subscription Ecommerce Live has put out is don't trick people, or don't make people even feel as though you're trying to trick
Isn't it
them.
funny that has to be said?
Yeah. And we're in a different, there is the buyer of 2022 is different and more educated than the buyer of 2018.
Sure.
Right? We have different expectations in what happens to our data and what a company owes us before we click buy or subscribe. And we also have like this expectation that everything that pops up in front of us, we should be skeptical of. Right? And so if you want to earn a reputation for being a trustworthy company that is worth subscribing to for years and years, like it can't be built on like a shaky ground of like a gotcha kind of start. Like it's like you're talking about, fundamentals matter.
Fundamentals matter. People want to feel respected and valued, not tricked. It should go without saying, unfortunately. Another thing I'll say too is that depending on what you're selling, there may be certain products in your line that warrant a subscription where others might not. So for example, one of our clients sells a lot of like personal care items, soaps, lotions, deodorant, things like that. Deodorant is their number one seller, and that's the number one thing people subscribe to. So maybe offering a subscription on that, or defaulting subscription on that, but not to the soap or the lotion, or something that is a little more experimental for people to try. You could play with different SKUs. And then another thing they did was they didn't offer a subscription on the deodorant until someone made their second purchase. When they were buying it for a second time, that's when they were presented with the offer. So we see people approaching it and experimenting in all different ways, which I think is sort of a lesson too. With most things that you do, whether it's running an ad or content marketing or anything, you're always running experiments to see what works for you, because there is no one size fits all. And these tactics are no different. What works for a deodorant company is not going to work the exact same way for a coffee company or for a kid's toy box or whatever. Excellent.
Okay, so have we hit on any of the common misconceptions about passive churn that we kind of promoted in the topics, or have we touched that topic yet?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's some standalone thing where you can do, credit card magic behind the scenes and the problem goes away. That's the biggest misconception. Once you kind of get past that and realize it's part of your whole holistic experience and picture, it starts to make a whole lot more sense.
Okay. And then what are like, any other things that people come in with? Like, do they come in expecting overnight results? Like, how does that usually work when someone?
That's something we have to do some education around as well. It really takes about 3 months to see a true cohort of people come through, because what happens when you turn us on, say day one, you turn us on, you've already got a bunch of people that are in some kind of failed payment process through your platform. So if you want a clean full month of failures, that really starts 30 days in. Then you have everyone who fails from 30 days in on is now in our process. And our process runs about 25 to 30 days. So then you have to wait for that whole cohort to go through. So really by the end of 3 months is when you have one full cohort of people to see how they do, which is difficult because we all want immediate gratification.
Right.
But that's the big difference between retention and acquisition. Retention is immediate. Someone clicks, well, maybe it's not immediate. Someone might have to come across you several times before they buy, but there feels like a more immediate result when you are turning those dials, whereas retention is slow. Retention takes a long time to see the effects, especially if you're tracking month over month. You got to wait months to see what happens.
And do you have a lot of people looking at retention of different cohorts, like they came in through this Facebook ad campaign, what is their churn rate like versus, or their failed payment? Like, you know, like, are you seeing that they can kind of take that and then start to apply it to the front end?
Yeah, to a degree. For example, one of our clients acquires customers two ways. One, you know, online DTC, all the typical online tactics. And then they also do direct TV. Those customers are much more expensive to acquire. And so we actually run two different processes for those two different groups of customers so that they know that, you know, these higher value customers are worth maybe our success team jumping in at a certain point if they're not recovered yet. Whereas you don't want to invest that much in, you know, the lower value people that weren't as expensive to acquire and don't spend as much with you monthly.
Got it. So what in terms of churn reduction is like the lowest hanging fruit? Like what could a merchant do immediately to begin to reduce churn?
This is not supposed to be too self-promotional.
No. But I mean, like if your solution is an answer, like that's okay.
It is. Yeah. So getting a strong dunning process in place is the lowest hanging fruit. And that's because it takes the least effort of everything you're going to do. Tackling active churn is difficult and you can't do it overnight. It requires, you know, a really deep look at your business and the ways that you approach everything from acquisition to the customer experience, to the quality of your product, to the quality of your service, to who your competition is. It's really all encompassing. Whereas this piece of it, getting a solid process in place just to make sure that you're not just churning people out unnecessarily. With no effort, you can make sure you have at least something airtight in process there. And then you can move on and not have to worry about that. You can move on and really focus on the things you can control.
Okay. So I think of that as like catching the people who didn't mean to churn in the first place.
Yes.
Like there should be no reason someone who didn't want to cancel is now a canceled subscriber.
Yes. So our goal is to make sure that anyone who does not make it through our recovery process, so someone who's lost at the end of our process, that was an active choice. They didn't want your product anymore. It should never be that we couldn't get a hold of them.
Okay. So tell me, let's just think D2C merchant on recharge. What does Churn Buster typically recommend as a recovery process? I know that we at Simple Focus Software have run something through y'all for like a SaaS tool, and I'm assuming that's probably different. So what do you advise a merchant, like in terms of touch points and messages that will be sent within whatever you're able to give away? You might have some industry secrets you want to hold on to, but typically, like what should someone look to set up through Churn Buster?
So I'll hit on the best practices.
Okay.
The first is to treat people with respect. So what typically happens in a payment platform like a Recharge or a Stripe is as soon as a payment fails, there's a retry and an immediate email that goes out to the person. It gives no chance for things like a spending limit or temporary issues to just get resolved without bothering somebody. So we wait a couple of days before we contact anybody and just try and resolve temporary issues as they happen. There's no need to tell someone to fix an issue that's not an issue. And then secondly, another big difference is that most processes only last, maybe a week before someone is considered canceled, whereas we extend that to almost a month. And it could be longer depending on your business, and we can adjust that. Some people ship things quarterly, but for most cases, we extend that to give people time. I mean, people are busy. You know what it's like. You've had to update a card before and the email's sitting in your inbox and you're like, I'll get to it. So you got to make sure people have enough time. Different touch points. If you're not getting them through email, you can try SMS if that's a piece of your normal communication with your customers. And then making sure that every message that comes through is different. What happens is with a lot of these platforms, all the messages get threaded together. So if the first one goes to spam, they all go to spam. And they all have the exact same message in them. So
which seems suspicious, right? Like the email clients, like, this seems suspicious. Why are they getting pounded with the same email over and over and over again?
Yeah. So just like you put effort into, your marketing automation tools, it should have your voice, it should have your branding. It should mix things up. Emails could be branded. It could come plain text from someone on your success team. We really craft things to work with the unique aspects of each company with the baseline of those best practices of longer campaigns, varied emails, not being too aggressive in the beginning. If you think about it, if your payment fails and you immediately get that email, it's almost like this slap in the face, and then 3 days later, slap in the face. And it's just not a nice experience for your customers. So we try and take that into account.
I was talking with someone we work with the other day, and they offer like a service-based business, and we were like talking through like the advantage of their service-based business, and one of the advantages was they like keep people on track, like the companies that they work for, like because they don't have that person in-house, and typically most agencies like will wait until you ask when is that next deliverable coming, like if they have missed it or something like that. But it's like the other way around with this company. Like they're reminding the in-house person that they need feedback on the thing because it's a recurring thing, right? And the way she termed it, I think applies here is, I said, well, your company is really good at reminding me I need to give feedback or to do a thing, like that this machine is running and my step is next, right? And she said, yes, we're refreshingly persistent.
I like that.
Yeah. And so that to me feels like the tone that a failed payment, change your card, reminder email, whatever the term for that email is, or that communication should be refreshingly persistent. It shouldn't take the tone that your brand hasn't taken before then. Like,
I think you may have just come up with our new tagline.
Yay! I think it would be interesting to do you experiment? Do some brands send this from like person at the brand versus, the team or the company name?
And mixing it up. Some can be branded like a marketing email. Some can be personal plain text from different people on your team. If you have a unique tone of voice, it should match that. Like the experience for your customers should be consistent at every point in the process. That's all important.
So it should feel like the next step in the journey that they've been taking with you thus far, so that there's consistency and cohesion, et cetera. I like, we have a comment. We say, Christina says, I use Churn Buster and it has been an effective tool for us. ! So
Great.
Thank you for adding that comment in, Christina. The chat is there for you people. If you have questions, please ask them. Joelle is here with us to spread wisdom and to share and kind of help answer some questions beyond what I asked, because sometimes we get tired of me and my questions. Last one that I have like queued up, and then I have like a stockpile of things in my head that I could turn this conversation into, is optimizing retention over time. We talked about like a short-term win, get in there and get the people who don't intend to churn, save those,
yes.
Right? Like save those, don't let them slip through. Long-term, and it's not overnight. Even what you're talking about is not overnight, but I'm talking about the retention strategy that's going to take 6 to 8 to 12 months to evolve and become the thing that you are doing, that really changes those numbers significantly and impacts them in a more meaningful way. How do you optimize retention over time? Specific
to failed payments or all retention?
Why don't we start with failed payments, and then we can like meander into, because I feel like that's at the the center of this conversation, but that it's all like related. Like they're not distant cousins. They're like, you know, in the same nuclear family.
Yep. So specific to failed payments, the way we try and sort of set expectations on what, you know, the process looks like is 90% of your gains or your impact on, you know, improvement of what you've done previously versus switching to us is going to happen the day you turn it on, because you have all these best practices in place. Over time, once we have sort of a baseline of data, then we can start experimenting with things that they typically only make sense for companies doing significant volume though. If you don't have a whole lot of volume, it's going to be hard to see any real meaningful changes. But those can be things like A/B testing, different things about your emails, different campaign flows. Like I mentioned, that one company that sends customers acquired from TV down a completely different flow than someone acquired from the web. Things like that. You can place in, you know, an SMS at a certain key point and maybe change where that hits. There's last chance offers. So if someone makes it all the way to the end, you can decide, okay, if this person spends over X amount with me every month, I'm going to give them this offer as just a last ditch effort to keep them in. But we typically don't start with all those kinds of things because you want to see, you know, where your baseline is. And then those are the kinds of things that's going to get you that extra, maybe 1, 3, maybe 5% improvement. But the biggest impact is just the fundamentals, as with most things. And it's not super sexy and people are usually looking for some kind of magic that's like, you know, but no, it's like everything. It's solid fundamentals and then tweaking a few little things to get those incremental gains over time. But at volume, those incremental gains can be huge. I mean, an extra couple percent for a company doing tens or hundreds of millions a year is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So it's big. Yeah. And okay. In terms of like, you know, retention as a whole, you know, it's really everything. It's making sure you're offering a product that people want, and that is quality that they're going to want to keep getting, because there's competition everywhere. So if yours sucks, people will figure it out and stop buying it. I mean, that's kind of number one. People expect really high levels of service. You know, it's all the things that we know we need to do and they're hard to do and there's not shortcuts to it. And I will say, like, ARPU is another piece of the puzzle that's really important because it gives people the chance to, you know, pause or delay a subscription rather than canceling, because replenishment items are tough. And I think there's massive anxiety around running out of something and having too much of something. Like, you always want the exact perfect amount. And there's an anxiety around being, you know, too far from that exact point. And so helping people ease those anxieties in any way you can will also extend LTVs.
Yeah. So one concept that we've been toying with some, now that I'm like brainstorming, if I'm in the seat of the merchant and I've got this ability to customize the message based on renewal count, right? Is I think there's probably certain verticals of products that this would or wouldn't apply to, but it's this concept of creating a subscription journey. Mm-hmm. And kind of if I could send a different message every renewal, what would that message be? Like, what would 6 months of my product, like, how would that be different than 8 months? Or, you know, and so I think what I'm trying to get at in a roundabout way is that from the very start of their experience as a subscriber, mm-hmm. you want to create a journey that they want to continue on. Mm-hmm. So it should feel like a no-brainer at the point at which a card fails because their credit card got stolen while they were on their European vacation and they had to change their card number. And for some reason that didn't update on all of their subscriptions or all the like ways that things go on in the background, right? Because I've had in moments recently where my card was compromised and they were like, anything you're subscribed to, it will still be subscribed to. And I was like, that's interesting. That's new. Like, so I'm sure you're dealing with how those things advance over time, but that person should get your message and be like, no, duh, here's my new card number.
Yes.
Right? Like you shouldn't be hanging on a hope that someone isn't noticing that they're getting charged or isn't remembering when the product arrives that they want to go cancel, or, like, because I think we've had people before say like, hey, we want to test not sending it. And my question with that is always, well, what is the motive behind not wanting to make someone aware they're about to be charged?
Yes. That's a
right.
good question.
And so I think when you're thinking about churn and retention, it's got to be about what makes this journey worth staying on for my customer, and like really understanding that in your subscription marketing, because a customer, basically you're continuing to market to them the why to stay. Like that is
the biggest marketing why to stay is, do they love your product? But I think, there's not, that's a tough one, but I always go back to, are you bringing in really good fit customers? How are you acquiring people? And if you're bringing in people from the beginning that are really good fits for what you're offering, all of this becomes easier. If you're casting a super wide net and bringing in anyone who will click the button, you're going to be like putting out fires left and right with all this stuff. You're not going to know what's working and what's not, because you're going to be comparing a good fit customer to a bad fit customer, and they're going to do completely different things at every step, and you're not going to know why. So it may mean growing slower for a lot of people. And I'm not a growth expert, so maybe that's bad advice, but if we're talking retention, yeah, you're going to have to go a little slower to move faster. And ultimately, I think that's the way to win, because brand loyalty is becoming everything, and it's not going to get any cheaper to acquire people, and competition is not getting any less. It's not going anywhere. The supply chain issues, who knows how long that's going to go on, and costs of everything are increasing. So people really need to want what you're selling if they're going to pay more for it. All these things stack up to needing to bring in people who are going to be with you. And over the long run, I think that's going to pay off more, even if it means a little slower growth.
Right. Because if you start with tricks and smoke and mirrors, then you can't be surprised when people vanish.
And you may have this hope that, if I can just get people to try it, they'll love it. Maybe. But that's a Hail Mary.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love this conversation. I could go on for hours. I know we need to wrap very shortly. I try to keep this at 45 minutes, and I don't always do really well at that. So thank you for helping me do that, because I feel like we narrowed the scope of topics just well enough to give it room to breathe within that span of time, but not to completely overwhelm the audience. So if you have any questions, right now is the time to drop them in. I'm starting my ending stuff. So if we do get one pop in, we'll take time to answer it. If not, we are done. So thanks everyone for joining us for this episode of Subscription Ecommerce Live. You can catch the replays over on YouTube or on your favorite podcast player. The podcast player may not show you the amazing slide that you want to go screen capture, want to share with the world as you kind of start to explore what you should and shouldn't be thinking about and doing in terms of retention. Joelle, where can people find you online to discover more about you, what you're thinking about retention, as well as to learn more about Churn Buster?
Probably the best place to find me is LinkedIn these days.
Okay.
Or you can email me, joelle@churnbuster.io. And any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, I hear you. You throw a mean happy hour.
We do. We like to do happy hours.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We will see you next time. In 2 weeks' time, we are back. There are 3 Wednesdays. I mean, 3 every other Wednesdays in June this month. So we're starting on the 1st and ending on the 29th. We've got Lauren Nolan from House of Wise on June 15th. And then we have Brandon Amoroso on, I hope I'm saying this correctly. I think it's electric.
It's just electric.
Yeah. Like I might like pause at the beginning and say like, okay, here are 15 different ways this could be said. Which one is the one that we need to go with? Electric marketing. And those conversations, you'll get email reminders about, just letting you know what we're talking about. But again, go like us on YouTube, follow, subscribe. And then if you want to, I don't know if we announce this too often, but I post replays on LinkedIn, like of little clips from these conversations. I think of them as like the gems that like I want to get people to right away. And I do this because I'm mimicking some marketers that I really respect who do this with longer form content and then turn it into shorter form. And what I have learned is that I have personally retained more from the conversation if I hear it again, or if I see like the written summary of that. So if you want to go follow my LinkedIn account, I'll be tagging Joelle when I post clips from this session. And just as a reminder that like retention is something that you should always be thinking about, that you don't just go solve it and then it's over. So look forward to some LinkedIn like dialogue around retention when that comes out. All right, no more questions. Thank you for joining us. We will see everyone next time.